They did not steal from me, they declared war. And I realized too late I had been living behind enemy lines for years. Forget the cheap notion that family is sacred. That is the comforting lie people tell themselves right before the knife goes in. My brother Marcus is a thief. I expected his eventual betrayal. He is predictable, a user and entitled charmer who saw an opportunity and took it. That is a crime of greed. A financial crime. I can face that. I can rebuild from that. But my mother, Amara? Her crime is something else entirely. Her actions were not greed. They were annihilation. She didn't just stand by while Marcus looted our legacy. She was the co-signer of the execution. She is the one who took the sacred title of mother, the word for safety, for unconditional acceptance, and used it as a legal binding weapon against her own child. That is the core conflict that has broken me in two. Marcus took the money, but Amara shattered the foundation of my sanity. She destroyed the very definition of love I carry in my heart. Tell me, how do I fight two people when one of them is the reason I know how to tie my shoes? How do I even begin to rebuild my life when the blueprint of trust was annihilated by the architect who drew it? The moment I saw her signature on that final deed, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a blinding total rage. A rage so cold it crystallized into certainty. This story isn't about recovery. It's about surviving the fallout of that familial warfare. And I promise you, I will never stop asking why she chose him over the truth. The memory of that perfect life is what now feels like acid. We inherited a legacy, a thriving small business, the kind of security my father slaved for. And what was my biggest mistake? I trusted them. Marcus with the books, Amara with the moral compass. That trust was a lie meticulously maintained. Every childhood lesson, every whispered comfort, every act of motherly devotion she ever showed me was revealed to be a tool. A way to keep me comfortable, compliant, and most dangerously, unsuspecting while they plotted my downfall. That trust was the perfect security system for them to bypass. It was the only way they could get close enough to inflict this level of damage. The emotional investment I had made in them was the currency of my own destruction. The mind, even when confronted with evidence, desperately clings to the old narrative. The first signs weren't a grand warning. They were small, irritating flaws in the matrix. A bank statement arrived for a dormant old account, an account in my name, showing a clean zero balance. My first instinct was dismissal, clerical error. But the next day, the cold reality set in. My business card declined. A vendor I had paid weeks ago called, frantic about an overdue invoice. The discomfort escalated to a cold dread. I felt the invisible walls closing in. The facts were stacking up, but the emotional truth was too agonizing to process. They were working together. The internal feeling wasn't fear. It was shame that I had been so easily duped by the two people whose love I had never once questioned. I realized I was not just losing money. I was losing control brick by painful brick. I was betrayed by the two people I should have been safest with. I want to know, what is the single most unforgivable betrayal a family member can commit? In your opinion? Let me know. I locked myself away, tracing the digital footprints of my life. The confirmation of the financial crime was swift, logging into the primary business account and seeing that zero balance. Years of sweat, years of late nights wiped out by a blinking cursor over nothingness. The loss was absolute, but the financial crime was only the introduction. The climax was finding the property deed. The property, the anchor of our family's wealth, needed two witnesses to be transferred legally. I found the digitized record of the transfer and forced myself to scroll. Marcus's signature was there, the face of the snake. But beneath it, clear and undeniable, was the name that finally broke my soul. Amara. This wasn't a brother stealing. This was a mother choosing. She didn't just passively sign off on the property transfer. She used her legal identity and her trusted relationship to authenticate the theft. She willingly signed off on the eradication of her own son's future. It was official. This wasn't just a crime. It was a family execution, and she was the willing co-signer. The rage wasn't loud, it was structural. It changed the very architecture of my mind. The initial shock of Amara's signature was a flash fire, but the investigation was the long, slow, agonizing burn. I wasn't just counting money. I was counting the ways my life was systematically turned into a lie. My adrenaline dried up, leaving behind a cold, clinical need for facts. A desperate attempt to anchor my rage before it consumed me. I hired an accountant. Not for financial advice yet, but for emotional preservation. I needed a third party, a clinical stranger, to confirm what my heart screamed was impossible. Watching him track the movements was like watching an autopsy of my life. I had to sit there day after day and listen to a professional detached voice detail the end of my security. What we uncovered wasn't impulsive theft. It wasn't Marcus seizing a single opportunity in a moment of crisis. This was a long-term, calculated conspiracy. It spanned nearly 2 years. 2 years of shared family dinners, shared holidays, shared laughter. All while they were meticulously dismantling my inheritance, brick by fake invoice, stone by stone. Every transaction they made was a lie they told me the next morning. The accountant showed me the patterns, the small test transactions first, months before the large withdrawals. They were testing the limits of my complacency. They were experimenting with betrayal. Then came the fabrication of shell companies, the false expense reports, the exploitation of every casual, undocumented trust one had ever extended to my own blood. It felt like watching a time-lapse video of my home decaying into dust, and at every critical stage, the same sickening dual authorship. Marcus's cunning enabled by Amara's access. I had to confront the sickening realization that they weren't thieves scrambling in the night. They were organized conspirators, using the intimate knowledge of my routine, my vulnerabilities, and my absolute trust in my mother to ensure their success. Confirming the financial data was one thing. Confirming the complete corruption of my mother was another. The core of my rage needed to understand the specific mechanics of her betrayal. I needed to know how she, the person who taught me the difference between right and wrong, could become a key player in a scheme of this duration. We found the answer in the access codes and legal proxies. Marcus couldn't have liquidated the assets without credentials. I only shared with Amara for dire emergencies. She willingly gave them over. She wasn't an unwitting, weeping victim of her favorite son. She was a conscious facilitator. We uncovered legal documents. Not just the deed, but multiple powers of attorney and asset authorizations. All signed by Amara knowing their true, destructive purpose. These were not quick stamps. These were notarized, dated acts of consent. In one instance, a significant parcel of family land was sold. The closing required her physical presence. Think about that. She had to drive to that office, sit at that table, look the lawyers in the eye, and confirm she was willingly signing away the asset that represented my future. She did it. She performed the required role, completing the conspiracy. It wasn't enough that she knew. It wasn't enough that she stood by. She weaponized her own motherhood against me. She acted as the final legal seal on a fraudulent scheme, turning my trust into the currency of my own devastation. She didn't just passively allow the theft. She guaranteed its success. I went from feeling betrayed by a brother to feeling psychologically erased by my mother. That sustained, calculated participation is the final crushing layer of the conflict. The hardest realization wasn't the loss of money, but the confirmation that the betrayal was calculated and long-term. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was deeply wrong, but you couldn't prove it? What was your biggest ignored red flag? I wish I hadn't ignored mine. After weeks of cold, calculating evidence gathering, the confrontation was necessary. I didn't want justice yet. I wanted the truth behind the smile. I started with Marcus, the instrument of the theft. I called him under the guise of an urgent business meeting and chose a place, a quiet cafe, that now feels like the stage for a bad play. I walked in carrying the single manila envelope, heavy not with paper, but with the weight of 2 years of deceit. I slid it across the table. It contained the complete forensic breakdown. The shell company transfers, the detailed bank statements, and the final damning deed signed by Amara. He opened it. His face, the face of my brother, the face of a million shared childhood memories, did not register shock or even shame. It was a terrifying, almost beautiful mask of bizarre entitlement. He looked up at me, not with remorse, but with pure, unadulterated anger that I had ruined his scheme by uncovering it. What is this? A shakedown? He sneered. You've always been so precious about the money. You always hoarded it, you know? Like you deserved it more. His deflection was a masterpiece of pathological narcissism. He didn't deny the crime. He denied my right to be angry about it. I managed to ask him, my throat paralyzed by fury, if he had taken it all. He finally admitted it, but his justification was the true emotional catastrophe. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He claimed he deserved it more because I was too obsessed with work, and he needed a fresh start. A fresh start funded by the total demolition of my life. It was father's money. I remember whispering, the fury so intense it paralyzed my throat. It was our legacy. You broke the law. You broke the family. Marcus just looked past my shoulder, utterly unmoved. You can make it back, he said, as if ordering a replacement part. Stop being so dramatic. That level of pathological indifference was chilling. In that moment, the terrifying realization hit me. The person I called my brother never existed. The charming, lazy sibling was merely a meticulously constructed disguise for a parasite. He was a stranger, an enemy who knew all my weak spots. I left that meeting realizing that his betrayal was cold, but comprehensible. The worst was yet to come. The confrontation with Amara was exponentially worse. It wasn't just anger. It was the ultimate, necessary excision of the person I had loved most. I met her at the family home, the very home they tried to sell out from under me. I placed the same envelope, the same evidence on the kitchen counter. Her reaction was the absolute proof of her malice. She didn't deny the signature. She collapsed immediately into a pool of tears and manufactured victimhood. She played the broken mother, attempting to deploy years of psychological conditioning to shut down my rational rage. The familiar performance was nauseating. You don't understand, darling, she sobbed, clutching my arm, trying to pull me into a manipulative embrace. You have to forgive him. Marcus was struggling. He has such a good heart, but he was failing. You were always fine. You had enough. I did this for him. The sickening reality crystallized in that single cruel justification. I did this for him. She had performed a perverse maternal calculation, a cruel triage, sacrificing the strong, stable son me to enable the troubled, dependent one. She saw my stability not as something she should protect, but as an affordable reservoir she could freely steal from. I pulled away from her. I asked her again and again the only question that truly mattered. Why, Mom? If he was struggling, why didn't you just come to me? Why didn't you ask? Why did you choose deception? Why did you choose to make me the enemy? Her final answer was the fatal wound. I couldn't risk him going to prison. I couldn't risk him being homeless. You would have said no. You always hold him to standards he can't meet. She chose his comfort, his immediate security, over my financial life, my emotional health, and the truth. She sacrificed me to try and save him. It was the ultimate brutal act of favoritism, masquerading as compassion. She valued the peace he brought her more than the life she destroyed. When I finally walked out of that house, I wasn't just leaving a mother behind. I was leaving a conspirator who had just confirmed that in her eyes I was expendable. That house, that counter, that moment, it remains frozen in time, the exact location where my family died. The entire betrayal hinged on their cruel justifications. If you were in a room with your betrayer, knowing you couldn't get the money back, what is the one single honest question you would demand an answer to? For me, it was simple, cutting straight to the soul of betrayal. Was I ever truly loved? The confrontation was the explosion. What followed was the nuclear winter. The conflict didn't subside. It turned inward, becoming a toxic, consuming force. I didn't just lose money. I lost the foundation of my reality. Every piece of stability I had built on the assumption of basic familial loyalty was vaporized. The financial loss was finite. I could eventually earn that back. The psychological damage, however, felt boundless. I was gripped by an absolute crippling paranoia. I couldn't answer the phone without checking the number 3 times, convinced every unknown caller was another party to the conspiracy. Every email was a potential scam crafted by someone I knew. Every casual friendly gesture from a neighbor felt suspicious, forcing me to question their motive. If the 2 people who loved me most were capable of 2 years of sustained, calculated deceit, then who on earth could I trust? My world felt like a meticulously laid trap, and I was the naive fool who kept stepping into the center. Then came the shame. It wasn't the shame of being poor. It was the overwhelming humiliation of being duped by my own mother. I was supposed to be smart, competent, capable. Yet, Marcus and Amara had seen my fundamental loyalty and stability not as strengths, but as exploitable weaknesses, a reservoir they could tap into without consequence. This realization stripped away my self-respect. I mourned the person I used to be, the one who operated from a place of secure, unquestioning faith in the people around him. That version of me was dead, murdered by their signatures. This trauma forced me to re-examine every single memory, every childhood hug, every birthday celebration, every proud look from Amara. All were instantly tainted. Was that hug real? Or was it a distraction while they planned the next move? Did her pride in my work simply mask her knowledge that she was preparing to liquidate it? The emotional weight of carrying a lifetime of manufactured memories was heavier than any financial debt. It left me with a deep, crushing feeling of being the secondary child, the expendable one. Marcus got the fierce, enabling loyalty. I got the calculated sacrifice. I felt utterly and completely adrift, isolated by a betrayal so profound it severed me from my own past. I realized I couldn't survive the legal battle, while simultaneously fighting the emotional battle in my head. The chaos had to end. The only way to stop the psychological bleeding, to establish an immovable, non-negotiable line, was through the law. This was the agonizing decision, involving lawyers, compiling the evidence for the police, formalizing the prosecution of my own brother and mother. This was not an act of revenge. It was the most brutal act of self-preservation. Revenge is about making them hurt. This was about saving the small, fragile part of me that was left. I had to treat them exactly as they had treated me, as predatory strangers and criminals. The first meeting with the lawyer was one of the hardest days of my life. I laid out the meticulous paper trail. He listened clinically, nodding over the transfers and the falsified deeds. I remember the air conditioning humming, the scent of stale coffee, and the complete absence of judgment. When I finished, the lawyer delivered the line that crystallized the future, a moment of stark, terrifying clarity. You have to treat them like criminals because that's what they are. Anything less is professional suicide. Signing those legal papers, the initial filings, the official reports, felt like tearing my family history out of a book and setting it on fire. It was an irreversible amputation. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, because once those papers were filed, there was no going back to the comfortable lie. The legal system doesn't care about misguided love or brotherly rivalry. It only cares about fraud. By filing, I was confirming to the world, and to myself, that my mother was a criminal conspirator. That fact felt heavier than any debt. The legal system became my necessary shield, establishing the hard boundaries that should have been set by love, but instead had to be enforced by the state. I finally drew a line in the sand, a line that said, I choose self-preservation now. The emotional weight of that choice was crushing, but necessary to survive the psychological wasteland. Boundaries are brutal when it comes to family, especially when they are enforced by law. When is it time to cut ties completely, even when it hurts? I had to learn that the hard way. Filing the lawsuit was necessary, but it plunged me into a new, draining kind of conflict. After the raw emotion of the confrontations, the legal system offered no catharsis, only cold, clinical endurance. The courtroom became a gray void, a place designed to suck the humanity out of suffering. The reality of litigation is a marathon of misery. It was the endless discovery phase, the paper wars, having to provide exhaustive detail, itemizing every single financial loss, while the defense, my mother and brother's lawyers, filed motions to delay, obfuscate, and generally make my life a living hell. Every piece of evidence I supplied was met with emotion that called my character, my competence, or even my sanity into question. They turned the theft into a debate about my reliability. The emotional toll was immense. I spent countless hours sitting in sterile offices, recounting the facts to lawyers who charged me hundreds of dollars just to hear the story of my profound familial trauma. It was dehumanizing. I was forced to look at Marcus and Amara in court, not as my family but as the defendants, while they maintained a sickening facade of innocence or worse, pity for me. Marcus would smirk. Amara would dab her eyes, playing the victimized elderly mother for the judge. Compounding this legal agony was societal isolation. I was fighting two battles. one for justice and one for my reputation. The extended family immediately fractured. I became the greedy litigant, the one who put family business in the streets. The silence from aunts, uncles, and cousins was deafening. I lost my entire social safety net based on shared history. They chose Marcus and Amara out of misplaced loyalty, fear of involvement, or simply because it was easier to condemn the fighter than the victims of his greed. I learned a devastating truth. When integrity costs you the comfort of family, most people will choose comfort every single time. I was entirely alone, navigating this cold process, fighting for justice against the two people who should have been fighting for me. The loneliness was a physical weight, but just when the cynicism threatened to consume me, I began to notice the small, essential kindnesses that formed my new foundation. This was the pivotal realization that saved me. Family is not blood. Family is choice. The universe had taken everything I inherited, but was beginning to offer me things I had to earn. Genuine, unconditional loyalty. My support came not from shared DNA, but from friends, colleagues, and my partner. People who listened without judgment and offered practical, grounded support. They were my new anchors. They didn't ask, "Why did you sue?" They asked, "Have you eaten today?" and brought me takeout. The partner who didn't condemn my constant anxiety, but sat with me in the silence, never pressuring me to forgive or forget. They were the ones who showed me what true loyalty actually looks like, a voluntary, continuous act of choosing me, based on my worth, not based on genetic obligation. This network became my safe harbor, my emotional triage center. Through their unwavering faith, I began the long, slow work of dismantling the walls of paranoia that Act 4 had built around me. They showed me that while deceit is real, trust is also real, and it can be rebuilt painstakingly with the right people. We celebrated small victories like making it through a difficult deposition, or simply getting out of bed. They didn't replace the family I lost. They created something stronger, something based on honesty rather than history. The universe takes, but it also gives. The friends who brought me food when I couldn't cook, who listened without judgment, they became my new foundation. They taught me how to trust again, one small act of reliability at a time. The courtroom was tearing me down, but my chosen family was rebuilding me, brick by honest brick. The victory wouldn't be in the verdict. It would be in the fact that I survived the war with a new, stronger, and more honest definition of belonging. I had lost the past, but I had gained a fiercely protected future. We all need a safe harbor when the storms hit. Who is the one person or group in your life you can always count on no matter what? Give them a shout out in the comments. We need to celebrate the people who show us what true loyalty looks like. After months of relentless, slow-grinding litigation, the legal system finally delivered its conclusion. There was a verdict. It was technically a financial victory. We reclaimed a portion of the lost assets, and there were court-enforced consequences for Marcus. But standing there, hearing the judge read the final decree, I felt nothing. No surge of triumph, no satisfaction. Just an immense, cold emptiness. The financial victory was simply a bureaucratic exchange. The money, even partially returned, was tainted. It couldn't restore the years of stress, the hours of paranoia, or the fundamental belief in my family that they had destroyed. I realized that the court could issue a judgment on fraud, but it could never issue a judgment on betrayal. The closure I desperately needed wouldn't come from a judge. It had to come from within. This led to the most difficult, complex process of all, true forgiveness. I want to be unequivocally clear. I did not forgive the action. The actions of Marcus and Amara remain unforgivable crimes of calculated deceit. But I had to make the conscious, agonizing decision to forgive the person for my own sake. Holding on to that toxic, consuming anger was like chaining myself to their wreckage. I chose to let go of the corrosive rage, not for their benefit, but for the health and freedom of my own soul. The true closure was realizing I was okay. The legal verdict was a technical win, yes, but the internal truth was that my spirit was stronger than their theft. I was finally free of the lie. The life they tried to destroy was still mine, and it was still worth fighting for. That internal verdict, the decision to move forward, was the real victory. The entire ordeal was a crucible. It was the worst thing that could have happened to me, but I emerged from the fire not broken but forged. The process of being completely stripped bare of trust, money, and family forced me to discover an innate strength I never knew I possessed. My biggest takeaway was this. The betrayal revealed exactly who I am when all the comfortable illusions are gone. The ordeal forced me to define my own worth, independent of their validation or approval. My worth is now tied to my resilience, my ability to rebuild, and my refusal to let their choices dictate my emotional future. The betrayal was a harsh teacher. They showed me who I couldn't trust, and in doing so, they provided the stark clarity needed to choose better. I learned to spot manipulation before it takes root. The scars are here and they will always be here, but they are not marks of failure. They are a map of my survival. They show precisely where I healed and where I became unbreakable. My spirit survived their theft, and that survival, that ability to start over from nothing, is my greatest achievement. I lost everything a family is supposed to provide: security, loyalty, unconditional love. But in the end, they could only steal what was external. They could not steal my character, my capacity to earn, or my ability to choose the good people who deserve to stand by me. The only thing they couldn't steal was my ability to start over. I want to end with this lesson, the one I paid for with 2 years of my life. Trust is a gift you give, not a right people are born with. Guard it fiercely. Recognize your own resilience. If this story of betrayal resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to rebuild your trust after a profound loss, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible. And if you want to follow my journey as I continue to build a new life based on honesty and choose my own path, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. I want to build a community here that understands the true meaning of loyalty. Now tell me about your strength. I found my power in what they couldn't steal. I want you to think about this. What is the one thing in your life that no one can ever take away from you? Not money, not time, not a loved one. Tell me about it in the comments below. Thank you for being here.